I never thought I would be telling this story. Even now, my fingers hesitate over these words, my heart racing with the memory of it all. But some stories need to be told, even if only to help us understand who we are or who we've become. My name is Claire Montgomery. I'm 54 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believed I knew who I was. I had spent nearly 3 decades married to Fred. We lived in a quiet suburb just outside Boston. I taught art at the local high school, a job that felt more like a calling in my earlier years, even if, over time, it became more routine than inspiring. Our home was warm and familiar, filled with little memories, holiday photos, old postcards, the smell of coffee in the mornings, the soft creak of the wooden stairs. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was ours. I wore it like a comfortable sweater, a bit faded, maybe stretched at the seams, but still wrapped around me. And then, in one quiet, ordinary afternoon, everything changed. It was a Tuesday in October. I remember it vividly, not just because of what happened, but because the maple tree outside our bedroom window had turned that brilliant, impossible shade of crimson. Every year I tried to paint that tree. Every year I failed to capture it. That day, its beauty seemed almost cruel. I had left school early with a migraine, one of those deep, dizzying ones that makes the world tilt ever so slightly. Fred had told me he would be in New York until Thursday for a conference, so when I walked through the front door, I wasn't expecting anyone. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. There was a noise upstairs, software muffled, and then silence. I climbed the steps slowly, my head heavy, my breath tight. The bedroom door was half open. That's when I saw them. Fred. And a young woman I recognized. Mary. I had met her once at a charity event. She was only 25. Young, bright, full of life. And she looked just as shocked to see me as I was to see them. Time froze. Fred's face turned pale. The bed, our bed, looked like a stranger's. And that sunlight, golden, sharp, spilled through the window like a spotlight on the scene, painting everything in warm autumn colors that felt anything but comforting. That moment didn't just break my heart. It rewrote my entire story. Claire, Fred started, but I just turned and walked away. What I remember most about that moment wasn't anger. It was something far more surreal. A strange, detached curiosity, like I was watching two people in a movie, their lives unraveling on screen. And underneath that, something even more unexpected: relief. In the days that followed, everything moved quickly, as if life had pressed fast forward. Fred packed a bag and left that very night. I found out that Mary worked at his firm. She was an art historian brought in to appraise their corporate collection. It felt almost poetic, in the most painful way. She had no idea Fred was married. He'd gone to great lengths to maintain the illusion. No wedding ring at work, no family photos in his office, elaborate business trips that were anything but. I thought I would resent her. I wanted to. But that feeling never came. A week later, she stood at my door, eyes red, holding a bottle of bourbon in shaky hands. She was apologizing before I could even say a word. "I had no idea," she kept repeating, her voice cracking. "I would never have, if I'd known." And I believed her. There was no defensiveness in her tone, no excuse-making, just raw sincerity. Her face mirrored something I recognized: confusion, heartbreak, betrayal. Not just mine. Hers too. So I did something I didn't expect. I invited her in. That night, we sat on the couch, sipping bourbon and sharing stories long into the early hours of the morning. The conversation flowed easily, disarmingly so. She was articulate, passionate about art, and carried this quiet intensity that reminded me of the version of myself I hadn't seen in years. The one before I traded my dreams of becoming a full-time artist for the steadiness of teaching and routine. Mary told me about growing up in Savannah, about humid evenings, Spanish moss, and ghost stories whispered on porches. She spoke of summers in Italy, of falling in love with Botticelli, and learning to decipher stories in paint. Her laugh was warm and contagious, her mind sharp and curious. It was strange how natural it felt. Two women, both blindsided by the same lie, finding something resembling peace in the ashes of someone else's truth. I don't know what I expected that night, but I didn't expect to feel lighter. I didn't expect to sleep better than I had in weeks, and I definitely didn't expect to want to see her again. He told me his wife had died of cancer 3 years ago, she said quietly, staring into her glass. I feel so stupid. You're not the stupid one in this equation, I replied gently. In the weeks that followed, an unexpected bond began to form between us. Mary left Fred's firm almost immediately after everything came to light. She accepted a position at the MFA, a role that was not only more suited to her talents, but also gave her the chance to thrive creatively. We started meeting regularly, for coffee, for walks in the park, or to visit exhibits together. She would talk passionately about the pieces she was curating, while I shared anecdotes about my students, the funny ones, the brilliant ones, and the ones who surprised me in ways I never anticipated. She encouraged me to return to painting, not just for class demonstrations, but for myself. It had been years since I allowed myself that freedom. One afternoon, she invited me to the University Athletic Center, where she was a member. It's way better than the YMCA, she said with a grin, and I can get you in as a guest. She wasn't wrong. The facilities were beautiful, an Olympic-sized pool, skylights that poured sunlight across the shimmering surface, and a quiet calm that I hadn't realized I'd been craving. After my swim, I felt lighter than I had in months. That kind of deep physical renewal that makes you remember you have a body, and that it can still move, still breathe, still feel alive. Mary arrived just as I was leaving the pool, still glowing from her spin class. We laughed about our timing, gathered our things, and continued our conversation as we made our way to the showers. Communal, old school, but surprisingly well-maintained. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, not really. But there was a comfort there, an ease between us that had quietly settled in. I found myself smiling more often when she was around, listening more closely, and noticing the little things. How animated she became when she spoke about art, how she always wore the same necklace when she was nervous, how she remembered the smallest details from our conversations. I'd never seriously questioned the course my life had taken. I'd been in a long-term marriage, raised a family, built a career. My identity had always felt settled, or at least stable. But there was something about Mary that stirred a different kind of curiosity, one that felt more about connection than definition. She never pushed, never made me feel awkward. If anything, it was her quiet presence, her thoughtfulness, and her honesty that made me start looking inward. A few weeks later, we filmed a short message for Fred, more for closure than anything else. It wasn't cruel or mocking, just a simple, sincere moment of two women who had moved on, each in their own way, and found something unexpectedly meaningful in the wreckage he left behind. But something shifted in me that day. Watching the water run down Mary's shoulders as we rinsed off after our workout, her skin glowing, her hair slicked back from her face, the ease and confidence in how she moved, I felt something stir deep inside. It wasn't just surprise or curiosity. It was something I hadn't felt in years. A door I thought had been sealed shut creaked open. I caught myself watching her longer than I should have, heart racing. I quickly looked away, my cheeks flushing, unsure whether it was the steam or the sudden warmth rising in me. That night, lying in my bed, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Not in any overt way, but in fragments. The softness of her voice, the spark in her eyes, the casual way she tossed a towel over her shoulder and smiled at me. I told myself it was just loneliness, that maybe I was simply overwhelmed by everything that had happened with Fred. But in my heart, I knew it wasn't just that. Mary and I began to spend more time together. Our friendship deepened in a way that felt easy, natural, and comforting. We wandered around the quieter corners of Boston, small galleries tucked away in Somerville, peaceful hours in the Gardner Museum, marveling at the lush courtyard, and a Georgia O'Keeffe retrospective that left us quietly moved. We'd sit on park benches for hours or talk over long dinners where time seemed to melt away. Sometimes our hands would brush, and neither of us would move. In those small moments, something unspoken passed between us. An understanding, perhaps, or something waiting to be named. One early spring evening, Mary asked me to sit for a sketch. She'd recently started painting again, something I'd encouraged her to do. We opened a bottle of wine in my little studio, the same space I'd reclaimed after Fred moved out. It had once been his office. Now it was filled with light and canvases, books, and peace. "Just your hands," she said. "They tell stories." No one had looked at me like that in a very long time. Like I mattered. Like I was worth seeing. I sat on a stool while she sketched in silence, the sun low in the sky, soft jazz playing in the background. I watched her watching me, not just the lines of my fingers, but me. There was something in her gaze that made me feel younger, lighter, like I was becoming someone new and familiar all at once. When she finally put down her pencil and looked up, her expression was quiet but certain. And in that still moment, something between us gently unfolded. We didn't need to say much. That night didn't change everything in an instant, but it made something clear. What we had wasn't confusion or distraction. It was real. It was ours. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt whole. "I've never done this before," I whispered near her lips. "Not really." "Neither have I," she replied, her voice quiet. "Not like this. Not with these feelings." That evening changed everything. We spent time together slowly, carefully, like we were discovering something rare and fragile. Her presence stirred something in me that had been silent for years. For the first time in decades, I felt seen. Not as a wife, not as a teacher, not in any role, but simply as Claire. As a whole person, with fears, hopes, and desires I had long set aside. 2 weeks later, I filed for divorce. Fred didn't take it well. Once he realized he'd lost both his mistress and his wife, his regret quickly turned to resentment. He fought the divorce, contested every step, and did his best to make it difficult, even though his betrayal had been clear. He spread stories among our social circle, painting me as unstable, going through some sort of crisis. Some people believed him, but I had never felt more grounded. For the first time in a long time, I was living honestly. Mary and I didn't go around making public declarations, but we didn't hide either. We were two adults who had found a kind of unexpected connection in the aftermath of someone else's dishonesty. My close friends, at least the real ones, were surprised, but most understood. Even my sister Elaine, who flew in from Milwaukee to check in on me, offered her quiet support. "Are you happy?" she asked over lunch, studying me carefully. "I am," I said, smiling before I even realized it. "Really, truly happy." But as I would soon learn, happiness is rarely simple. When spring melted into summer, our lives became more intertwined. Mary started staying over more often than not. We found rhythms, morning routines, dinner habits, weekend rituals. And with that closeness came friction. She was still learning how to live. I had already lived a life. She liked loud music and last-minute plans. I preferred a book, a soft light, a schedule. She thought about what she could build next. I thought about what I wanted to preserve. And then there was her family in Georgia. Deeply traditional, quiet in their disapproval. Weekly video calls became exercises in omission. I was her friend who was helping her through a tough time. Her mentor in the Boston art world. Each call left her visibly drained. I could see her torn between wanting to be honest and fearing what honesty would cost her. By August, the pressure began to show. Little arguments about timing, cleaning, how one of us phrased something started to break the surface. They weren't about the actual things. They were about the tension we didn't yet know how to name. We were learning the deeper part of love, that it requires more than chemistry and hope. It requires grace, patience, and knowing when to speak and when to simply let something go. Then came Labor Day weekend. She was invited to her childhood friend Sophie's wedding in Savannah. Mary wanted me to come, but not as her partner. Not officially. "Just until after the wedding," she said quietly. "Sophie's family is like my second family. They wouldn't understand." "I'll tell them later, I promise." I stood there, feeling something in me retreat. "I've spent almost 30 years not being true to myself," I said softly. "I can't do that anymore, not even for you." so she went alone. And when she came back, something between us had shifted. Something had shifted during those 5 days in Georgia. She told me about reconnecting with old friends, the calm familiarity of her hometown, and deep conversations with her mother about what lay ahead. She didn't say it directly, but I could sense her growing distant, as though she was slowly grounding herself in something more familiar, something safer. Our conversations became tense more often. My insecurities, that I was too old for her, that what we had was simply a reaction to heartbreak, not something lasting, began to echo louder in my head. I started to question things I never used to. I hated that feeling, that creeping doubt. It made me feel smaller, less certain of myself. Then came October, nearly a year since the day I walked in on Fred and Mary. She received a job offer from the High Museum in Atlanta. It was prestigious, a clear step forward in her career, and just a short drive from her family in Savannah. "Ah, I need to take it," she said one evening over dinner. Her eyes were focused on the candle between us, rather than on me. "It's an incredible opportunity," I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. But the silence pressed between us until I finally asked, "And what about us?" She looked at me with so much emotion it almost hurt. "Claire, this year has meant everything to me. You've helped me grow, helped me understand who I really am. But I'm not ready, not for this, not yet." The words didn't come as a surprise, but hearing them still hurt. "Because I'm older than you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She shook her head firmly. "Number because I'm still figuring out who I am. I thought I was ready to start a new chapter, to come out to my family, to commit to something serious. But I'm not there yet. I need to do this on my own, without Fred, without Boston, without us." Part of me wanted to protest, to remind her of all the small, beautiful moments we had shared. The laughter, the quiet mornings, the plans we'd talked about, even if they were only whispered dreams. But when I looked at her, still so young, still searching, I understood. This was something she needed to do for herself. That night, as we lay in bed, I stayed awake long after she'd fallen asleep. The moonlight cast soft lines across her face, and I knew deep down that letting go was the kindest thing I could do. Sometimes love doesn't mean holding tighter. It means understanding when to step back. 3 weeks later, she moved back to Georgia. We said we'd stay in touch, that we'd visit, that nothing would really change. At the time, we believed it. But life has a way of moving forward, whether you're ready or not. Now, 2 years have passed. We still exchange messages on birthdays and the occasional holiday. She's dating again, someone new, someone different. A man she met through her work at the museum. I'm genuinely happy for her. She's finding her rhythm, her direction, and that's all I ever wanted for her. As for me, I found a new chapter too. I took a sabbatical from my teaching job and spent 6 months living in a small adobe house just outside Santa Fe. I painted every single day. The sunlight there, so vivid, so honest, helped me find pieces of myself I thought were long gone. Before I returned to Boston, I sold 3 of my paintings through a local gallery. It wasn't a breakthrough, but it was enough to remind me that the artist in me, the woman I used to be before everything, was still here. Still breathing, still dreaming. Fred and I finalized our divorce quietly, without any further drama. He's remarried now, to someone closer to his own age. We actually ran into each other last month at a mutual friend's retirement party. We exchanged polite nods, a brief moment of shared history passing between us like a breeze. Since then, I've been on a few dates, with both men and women. None of them have turned into anything serious, but that's okay. At 56, I've discovered something beautiful. I'm open now, in ways I never allowed myself to be before. Life still holds surprises. Growth doesn't stop when the calendar says it should. And still, there are quiet moments when I miss Mary, not just with longing, but with a deep tenderness. It wasn't just the connection we shared, but the way she saw me. Really saw me. The way she looked at my paintings and understood something even I hadn't noticed. Her laughter in my kitchen, the warmth of her presence. With her, I felt like I was finally home in my own life. Do I regret anything? Not for a second. She didn't just walk into my life. She lit it up. She reminded me that rediscovery can come at any age, and that love, whatever form it takes, is always worth the risk. Just last week, I received a small package in the mail. Inside was a charcoal sketch she had drawn of my hands from that unforgettable April evening. On the back, she had written, "For Claire, who taught me that true art requires courage. All my love, Mary." I hung it in my studio, where sunlight catches it in the morning. It reminds me that some connections aren't meant to last forever, but that doesn't make them any less real or any less powerful. Some people come into your life not to stay, but to help you find your way back to yourself. And that, I've come to believe, is more than enough.